Okay, hello. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening to you, wherever you are in our big, beautiful world. And welcome to our webcast here from Spider Strategies. Today we'll be covering comparing apples and oranges to manage strategy in Spider Impact. My name is Tom Keating. I'm a customer success advocate here at Spider Strategies. Very happy to be with you today. Because we're recording this session, I won't be able to interact with you live on this webinar, but if at any point in time you'd like to reach out to me, please feel free to do so at tom.keating@spiderstrategies.com. My goal today is to show and teach you how Spider Impact empowers you to bring all of your apples and oranges and bananas of KPIs and measures together in one consolidated software solution that allows you to easily understand their combined impact on important corporate objectives and deliver on your desired overall corporate strategy. I should also point out that I am the only guy from Spider Strategies on the call here today on this webinar, and I do all my own stunts. So don't expect perfection from me, but let's have at it. Today, of course, as I said, we're going to be talking about comparing apples to oranges to manage strategy within Spider Impact. To get there, we have to start with talking about scoring and coloring in Spider Impact and make sure that you understand fundamentally what Spider Impact does. So one thing that Spider Impact does is it assigns a normalized score between 0 and 10 to any and all actual performance values that you provide for the KPIs and measures that you are tracking. Secondly, Spider Impact applies an associated color to that defined normalized 0 to 10 score according to the scoring type and the thresholds that you've defined for each of those unique KPIs and measures. And lastly, Spider Impact rolls up the normalized scores to higher levels using a weighted average. This, again, is a very foundational understanding that you need to have as we move forward and talk about how in the world you can compare your business apples to your business oranges all within one solution to really manage your strategy. The challenge behind this scoring opportunity is that in a business world, you're going to have lots of different types of KPIs and measures. You know, you're going to have an apple of a KPI. It could be something like sales revenue or marketing campaign email sent or client meetings hosted or whatever it may be. Then you'll have other measures or KPIs which could be really divergent and different from the first one. In this case, maybe IT availability index or help desk calls answered within 3 rings or something. So really, really diverse and different measures. And the question is, as you are tracking and scoring those measures, the big question is, how are you really doing at an overall performance perspective? So that is the challenge, is diverse, disparate, myriad different types of measures, and how do you understand across everything how you're really performing? So the benefit of normalized scoring, the 0 to 10 normalized scoring, is what we'll talk about here. So let's again go back to this idea of different diverse measures. One measure is sales revenue. There's our apple. Another measure we'll talk about, customer churn. There's your orange. And let's even have a third measure here of a banana, which is profit percent. Of course, these are all different types of measures. The sales revenue is currency focused. The customer churn is going to be person or quote unquote unit based. And profit percentage is obviously a percentage type measure. So they're all distinctly different from each other. In a given time period, you will be tracking your performance on each of these different measures or KPIs, of course. So let's imagine for a given month, you are able to determine that you sold $550,000, so your sales revenue is that. You lost 80 customers, so your customer churn number is down into the tens. So right there, you've got one measure that's in the hundreds of thousands, you've got another measure that's in the tens, and then your profit percentage for that same time period is 33%, okay? The question again here is, what is our overall performance across these different measures that are likely coming from different departments or different divisions within your organization? So to answer that question, again, this is where we strongly recommend and apply the idea of the normalized scoring system. So through Spider Impact, you can translate that $550,000 sales revenue to a normalized score number of 6 based on the scoring type that you assigned to sales revenue and the thresholds that you defined for that measure. Similarly, customer churn gets translated from an actual value of 80 to a normalized score of 2, because 80 is a lot of customers to lose, and so that's really poor performance. So it's getting a low normalized score. And over to profit percentage, we've translated again the actual value of 33% to a normalized score of 8, again based on the scoring type and the thresholds defined. This gives you then like one common playing field where these disparate measures can be gauged against each other appropriately. So if we bring them all together, we end up with an overview understanding that across these three measures that again come from different divisions or departments of the company, that we as a company are performing at 5.33 on a 0 to 10 normalized spectrum. Now, how did that come to life? Where and why did we get 5.33? It's really simple, folks. It's an average of those normalized scores. We took the 6 and the 2 and the 8, added them together to 16, and then divided equally by 3. Thus, our score, our normalized score across all these measures of 5.33. Now, how do you define the normalized 0 to 10 scores in Spider Impact? So at a broad overview perspective, first and foremost, of course, you know your business, you know your measures, you know what you're measuring and tracking and trying to improve. Here again, we've got these examples of revenue, churn, and profit percentage. And again, you know your business, so you should be able to define what type of actual performance is very bad, what type of actual performance is kind of medium, it's okay, it's acceptable, but not great, and what type of performance can you say that is exceptional, that is very good. And what you do in Spider Impact is, again, set up the normalized scoring paradigm by assigning an actual performance value that you know to be very bad. You say that's a normalized score of 0. To the far other end of the spectrum, the very good performance, actual performance, gets assigned to the normalized spectrum number of 10. And of course, in the middle, the median performance will get something like 5. So generally speaking, that's how you set up the normalized scoring for all of your various measures within Spider Impact. Let's take a look at a couple of specific examples. So back to our friend sales revenue, the Apple. Here at our company, this Mobile World company that is our demonstration and webinar environment, we've identified that sales revenue by month should never be down any lower than 100,000. And if we even get close to that, that's very bad. We ideally would love to be selling upwards of 750,000 per month. So again, we've set up sales revenue with a given scoring type and this normalized, if you will, score spectrum of 0 to 10. Again, back to customer churn, same general idea, except that, of course, in this case, we want very few customers to leave us. So the smaller the number of customers churning or leaving, the better we perceive that to be. Thus, 0 customers leaving is idyllic, and we would give that a normalized score of 10. 80 customers leaving us would be awful. We never want to go there, so that would be our normalized score of 0. And of course, something like 40 hangs out in the middle, and it would get a normalized score of 5. Another kind of fun example here, getting away from our profit percentage, but over to a warehouse inventory example. Imagine a warehouse where what you want is the perfect number of widgets on the shelf so that you can fulfill any customer orders. You don't want too many because it would take up unnecessarily space within the warehouse. So you have identified that month over month, so that you can always fulfill customer orders, you want exactly, or as close as you can be, to 400 widgets on the shelf at all times. If you find that you only have 200, that could be a very bad situation because you might not be able to fulfill a big order. Similarly, you don't want 600 widgets on your shelf because that's just too darn many and it's taking up too much space. So these are 3 fairly simple examples of how you can set up some normalized scoring for different types of measures and different scales. Spider Impact provides you with 11 different scoring types. They're all listed here. I won't read the list at you here in just a minute. We'll talk about some of these a little more specifically. But the point here is we've got a lot of different ways that you can choose to set up your 0 to 10 normalized scoring spectrum. Let's take a little more deeper dive into a couple of these different scoring types. The first and most commonly used, or the 2 actually most commonly used scoring types are goal/red flag, and then another one that's very similar, which is 3-color. Both of them provide you with very, very simple and intuitive results of red, yellow, green colors based on dividing your 0 to 10 scoring, normalized scoring spectrum up into thirds. So those are the two most commonly used. They're very, very similar to each other. The subtle difference is that the goal and red flag scoring type, in that method, you just define your red flag threshold and your goal threshold, and the software comes up automatically with a worst number and a best number for you in terms of actual performance. If you do the 3-color scoring type, you yourself have control over what is defined as an actual performance value that is identified as worst and what is identified as best. So they're very similar, subtle difference, but those are the two most commonly and popularly used scoring types. Another pretty simple one is to just remove the whole concept of yellow in the middle and just divide your 0 to 10 scoring spectrum evenly smack down the middle. Anything less than 5 is going to be red. Anything greater than 5 on a normalized score is going to be green. And of course, it could be a 2 or it could be an 8, but it's either going to be red if it's a 2 and green if it's an 8. Another way, kind of a dichotomous way to just split up the 0 to 10 is to say, look, either you met your goal or you didn't, or you did something or you didn't. If you did meet your goal, then you're going to get a full-on normalized score of 10. There's no sense of 7 or 8 where you're almost there. If you did it, you get a 10. If you didn't do it, you get a 0. Another scoring type that takes the general idea of dividing 0 to 10, this time up into quarters instead of thirds. Again, 4 different colors, bringing into play the middle low color of orange, between red and yellow. Just another way allowing you to kind of slice your 0 to 10 scoring pie, if you will, in a different way. And then staying with that 4-color theme, a lot of our customers like the idea of really highlighting, so it really pops out really strong performance with a now introduced color of blue. But they basically, those 4 colors work exactly the same in terms of dividing that 0 to 10 scoring spectrum into 4 things instead of the previous 3 or 2. Moving ahead, back to the idea of that warehouse example that we just discussed. The scoring type that's behind that warehouse inventory is called color stabilizing, or it's stabilizing. This is a simple 2-color stabilize, where again you basically say we know the perfect number of widgets on the shelf, and if we've got that number, it gets 10. If we have too few, you're going to move to the left down the scoring. If you have too many, you're going to move to the right on the scoring, and going too far left and too far right in either case, both are bad. You can expand on that concept to include, again, the yellow coloring. So you kind of are like, well, it's not terrible yet, but we're moving a little bit dangerously out of the middle, and that can be indicated, of course, with the yellow coloring. And then the last of the 11 types that I'll just touch on briefly here is it's kind of unique. It's an unscored KPI. So as much as I said earlier that Spider Impact is going to assign this idea of normalized scoring to all of your KPIs, the truth is you don't have to score every single measure that you track within our data repository and within the Spider Impact system. If you create an unscored measure, you of course are not going to be defining any kind of thresholds, because the software doesn't need them, because it's never going to have to translate an actual performance value into a normalized score. So you don't need the thresholds, okay? And these are most typically used for 2 purposes. One is to just get a piece of information, a name and a number, into the system so that you can maybe use it on something like a graph, where you could display a target or a forecast that could then be compared against the actual performance values in a given time period. Another way that it's very commonly used is to just simply collect information about a measure or a KPI. Even though you don't necessarily desire to score it individually, you may want that number to become a component in another calculated measure that you then in turn do actually score. And I'll show you an example of that later when I actually get into Spider Impact in our live demonstration. I'll show you how our customer churn percentage is leveraging 2 unscored measures, but then the customer churn percentage itself gets scored. And then the last little point about these unscored is if you set up an unscored, I should say, measure or KPI, it's not going to have any weight at all when the measures are rolled up. And that idea of rolling up maybe at this point still a little foreign because we haven't covered it yet, but now is the time that we're going to talk about another key concept here, which is rolling up scores within Spider Impact. So I'm going to read this at you because it's important. That once your KPIs and measures have been scored, those scores can roll up to higher levels of performance, if you will, buckets. I like to do the double quotes, call them buckets. And those buckets can be either scorecard-based objectives, perspectives, themes, and even parent-level scorecards. And that's all done using a weighted average. So let's just take a quick screenshot look at what I'm talking about here by showing you Spider Impact here. And if you can focus your attention on the far left where we've got improved brand awareness highlighted and its name is up at the top. So we're looking at here at an objective to improve brand awareness within the marketing department's scorecard. And what is happening under that objective is 4 different measures of Google search position, article mentions, Twitter mentions, and Facebook likes have been identified as measures. And they are each in their own way, uniquely. They were all set up uniquely and individually. They are all being scored. Thus, you see these normalized scores of 8.89 and 3.33 and 10 and what have you. And what the software is doing is it's rolling those scores, those normalized scores, up to the improved brand awareness based on the weight that each of those measures have been assigned. So in this case, it's taking those 4 measures, their normalized scores, and coming up with an average of 7.36 for improved brand awareness. And then to continue the idea of roll up even further up the ladder, if I pop up another slide here or another image, if we move further up that hierarchy within marketing, within the marketing scorecard, we're now focusing here on towards the right on the marketing scorecard, and you see that it has a score of 6.89. Well, that is again in turn coming from the fact that we have those 2 objectives to improve brand awareness and to increase lead generation, each of which have been scored, with their 7.86 and the 6. I can't, whatever the number is, my eyes aren't good enough. And that number, those 2 numbers again are being averaged together according to their weight. They're equally weighted, and thus we come up with a number of 6.89 as the normalized score for the marketing department overall. Okay, so continuing with this idea of rolling up scores, just want to make sure that we're all very clear on how this is done. If that discussion we just had didn't convey it, we'll just beat the dead horse here. The way it works is the weighted average of those subordinate normalized scores defines the score of the superior object. And on this slide, we're talking about equal weighting. So let's take a look at one example here where we've got an objective at the top and then 4 underlying, if you will, feeder measures. And what you're seeing here is that the feeder measures have all been normalized scored at 6, 6, 6, and 10. So we end up with a objective level, the parent level score of 7, and the answer as to how and why that happens is very similar to what I shared with you earlier. Because these are equally weighted, it's simple math. 3 times 6 plus 1 times 10 gives you 28, and you divide by the number of measures that feed up to that parent level objective, and you end up with 7. Exact same kind of concept here, a different objective, different measures, but again, because they're all equally weighted, you're just taking the 3.34 once, the 3 times 6.67, add those results together to get 23.35, and again, divide equally by 4 to come up with a score, a normalized score for that parent level objective or perspective or whatever's up at the top of 5.84. Now, you don't have to always use equal weighting when you're rolling up. And this is the last here, presentation slide, and then we'll actually get into the software. But you can adjust the weighting. So what we're going to talk about here is the same concept of subordinate scores that are equal, but we'll show it to you if you have different weighting applied to any of the feeder measures that are being rolled up. So here in example number 1, we've got 5 different measures. Notice that they are all equally weighted. And I should point out that Spider Impact by default assumes that all feeder, if you will, measures should be equal to each other. Their weighting should be equal, but you have total control over that. And I'll show you how easy it is to adjust once we're in the demo. But the idea here is what's happening is, of course, it's finding 2 of the 1.67 scores, 3 of the 8.3s. Again, it's doing the same basic math, the same roll up, divide by 5, you get 5.66. But what if we have those exact same measure scores, the same 1.67 twice, the same 8.33 3 times, But notice here that under the weighting, we have increased the weight of the very first measure that is scored at 1.67. And we have identified that for whatever reason, this measure is 16 times more important, if you will, or should be weighted, should have 16 times the mathematical weight of any of its measure peers at that level. So in this case, what you end up with is obviously a completely different normalized score up at the top. And the math here, of course, is because the 1.67 is 16 times more weighty, if you will. It completely changes the math. And again, I won't read it at you, but obviously 17 times 1.67 instead of just the 2 in the last example. So the point here is that you can adjust the weighting to be appropriate for what, as you perceive your measures and the strength that they should carry and the weight that they should apply to these types of roll-up calculations. Okay, wish I could ask a question whether anyone has any questions, but I can't because we're recording this. So now we'll just forge ahead into a live demonstration of Spider Impact and show you pretty much what I've been talking about here for the last 10 or 15 minutes, live and in person within Spider Impact. Okay, so I'm now in Spider Impact. For those of you that are existing partners or customers or are present, sales prospect, you're probably familiar with the environment I'll be working with here for the rest of this webinar. It's our Mobile World Inc. Test and demo environment. Mobile World is a mythical telecommunications company. It's a big global company, sort of like AT&T. Big, and they are comprised of a corporate level scorecard, and then they've got a lot of different departments or divisions. So we have a finance, a marketing, customer support, operations, IT, HR, so on and so forth, okay? And at the corporate level, what they have done is embrace balanced scorecarding very methodologically, strictly, so that they've got the perspectives of financial, customer, internal processes, what have you. There are also, as I said, different departments. So the people in finance have their own department, their own finance department scorecard, and they can set that up to be any structure that they desire. Similarly, our friends in marketing, same idea. They have their own scorecard. Now, one thing that I want to convey as we move forward so that we don't forget about the overall theme here is the idea of comparing apples and oranges. Different measures that might be existing and tracked, created, tracked, scored in completely different divisions or departments of a large organization, like Mobile World. So to that end, I'm going to try and simplify things visually for you, and I'm going to open up a briefing. And a briefing is, of course, just a presentation book or deck that can be used for a variety of presentation purposes. But what you see here is just a single, very simple kind of cockpit dashboard that I constructed here for this month's webinar. And what I hope you're picking up on without me even needing to point it out to you is, of course, 4 different measures are presented here. And they come from different areas of the business. So product revenue comes from the financial scorecard. Leads come from the marketing scorecard. Customer churn percentage comes from our customer support scorecard. And headcount comes from human resources. So these are apples and oranges and bananas and watermelons. They're different. They are all presented, of course, on one consolidated dashboard. As always within Spider Impact, I can navigate forward and backward in time very easily to review performance, historical performance, in different months and what have you. Also, what I'm really focused on here is just showing you how these distinct measures were set up originally and how each of them conform to the different types of scoring that we talked about earlier. So I'm going to do just a simple drill through. We'll start here in the upper left, and let's go take a look at product revenue and see what it's all about. So as those of you who know Spider Impact, a simple single click drills me through from that dashboard down into the scorecards area. And if you look to the black, you can see that I'm looking in the second black navigation pane. I'm focused here on product revenue. And I, of course, have a visual overview of its performance over time. As you know, I can navigate, again, forward and backward in time to review what's happening here. The point of jumping in here, though, today is not to review its historical performance, but to talk about how this measure was set up, what type of scoring it employed, what data type it is, and what thresholds were defined so that it can be scored appropriately, such that in the month of March 2021, we have a normalized score of 5.27 for this. So how and why? Let's take a look at this measure behind the So I'm going to click the edit button in the upper right, and we're now looking at the properties or the attributes of this product revenue measure. Okay, we of course have a name for it. It is of course a type of that's measure. Here, very importantly in the middle, is the scoring type that we selected. And here again is that list of 11 different scoring types that we talked about earlier. And we, again, for this measure, have chosen the basic goal and red flag scoring type. We are updating this measure on a monthly basis. Again, quite importantly, the data type for this measure is that it's currency. And then if I scroll down a little further here, in the series area, you see that I have the opportunity to set a red flag threshold and a goal threshold, okay? So that is a very simple fundamental setup for this product revenue measure. Now, while we were creating the measure originally, of course, as you saw, we've got the list of all the different scoring types. So right now, I could even, in an ad hoc, on a whim fashion, I could say, you know, I'd prefer to define my own worst number, my own red flag, goal, and best numbers. And I can empower myself to do that and activate additional series and threshold fields by simply just changing the scoring type up here towards the top. We do want to leave this one at goal and red flag. The other thing, while I'm here, I do want to point out to you that we left the weighting of this measure at the default equal with the other measures that are sort of peers to product revenue. There's training revenue, there's book revenue, which are other measures that are being rolled up to the revenue theme in the financial scorecard. We left it at 33% for each of them. And that was intentional at that time. And what then, of course, if I can direct your attention, I'll get out of edit mode here temporarily. Okay, I'm not going to save any changes that I may have made. So over here, again, on the left in black, if I highlight revenue, this is, again, what we call a theme. It's, again, one of those roll-up buckets. And you'll see, again, if you look to the bottom middle here, that product revenue, training revenue, and book revenue are all being scored, right? Product revenue is 5.27, training 1.9, book revenue, a goose egg of 0. A weighted average, just add those numbers together, divide by 3, gives you a score of 2.39. So pretty straightforward there. Now, I just want to point out, again, this idea of changing the weighting and how easy it is to adjust the weighting. So I'm going to go back to product revenue. I'm going to click on edit and show you that under the weighting, I could say, you know what? We have determined that product revenue is by far our most important source of revenue, and we believe it should be weighted 4 times more than training and book revenue. So in a simple change right here, couple quick clicks, I have just adjusted the weighting of that particular measure. And now you'll notice that the score for revenue has changed. It is now 3.83, okay? It used to be 2 point, I forget what it was. It was 2 points something or other, I forget, but it was lower than it is right now. And the reason, again, behind that is that we have adjusted the weighting of the product revenue, and so it is, again, being counted as, I guess, more important or has more weight in that roll-up math that we discussed earlier. Okay, let's jump back to the dashboard and we'll take a look at another one of the measures that's here. This is leads. Up to the upper right, I'm going to click on leads and again just dive down into the scorecard. Again, take note here that upon clicking on that, I am now in the marketing department scorecard. Last time we were in finance, now I'm in marketing. And again, we're focusing on leads. And I just want to quickly review with you the nature of how this measure was set up in terms of its scoring type and its data type. So I'll again just click edit, take again another quick look and see that in this case, the person that defined this measure chose to go with the 3-color scoring type because, as I just discussed earlier, they wanted the opportunity to define their own worst, their own red flag, their own goals, and their own best. They didn't want to be dependent on the software defining what is worst and what is best. And then, of course, kind of importantly here for this leads is the data type up here towards the middle right has been set as number. You know, product revenue a minute ago was leveraging currency. You know, leads are going to be obviously a unit, you know, they're a number data type. So that's the simple nature of leads. And I'll get out of here and then we'll go back to the dashboard one more time. Customer churn percent down here in the lower left corner. So again, this is our first on the dashboard of a percent type of measure. Again, I'll click on it real quickly to drill down into, in this case, the customer support scorecard. And again, we see that, you know, this customer churn percentage is a measure that falls under the customer satisfaction theme. and the customer satisfaction team is rolling up the customer satisfaction survey number and the customer churn number with equal weight. And again, let's just take a quick look at customer churn and how it was set up. Again, its name, of course, we see that it's got the 50% weight. Again, in this case, we're using what is really the default, and as I said earlier, most commonly used is goal and red flag. It again is a percentage type. Now, here's really why I wanted to get in here, is to show you that this measure is a calculated measure. So what we're doing is we're taking the total number of customers and the total number of lost customers and dividing them against each other to come up with this number. While we're in here, let's take a look at that total number of customers measure, and I want to show you here that it's unscored. So this total number of customers, notice it is using the unscored data type. Thus, down here in the series, there's no requirement or need for me to define any kind of threshold, because we're not trying to translate it over into a normalized score at all. Similarly, with the number of lost customers, same intent. We're using these two measures simply for data acquisition to give us an opportunity to put in the total number of customers and to put in the total number of lost customers, but we are choosing not to uniquely score. We're not judging, if you will, how many customers we have or how many we've lost. But we do leverage both of those when we come up to customer churn, and again, use a calculation to define customer churn. So that's just a good example of what I alluded to earlier, of a reason why you might set up some measures or KPIs that you choose not to score. All right, and then I'll go ahead and click done there, and we'll see that when we look at those number of lost customers or total number of customers, we see the actual number presented, of course, but again, you're not going to see any colors. There'll be no red, yellows, or greens because we're not scoring them, and thus in turn we're not coloring them. But the customer churn value, where we did set some thresholds around the goal and red flag scoring type, it is of course being scored. Okay, and then one more example here, the head count. This is a good example. I alluded to this as a warehousing example previously. But here at Mobile World, we do have some aspirations of sort of the perfect number of employees that we want to have at any given time. So this comes from, I should say, the human resources scorecard. And again, headcount is one of many measures that the human resources department, in their fairly simple scorecard, they are rolling up, 7 different measures. And headcount is, of course, one of them. And I'll just take a quick look here at how the head count was set up. Again, it's a measure with a name. Again, notice that the scoring type that we chose to go with here is one of our stabilized or sort of quote-unquote warehousing. I probably shouldn't talk about people and head count in the same vein as warehousing widgets, but it is the same scoring type. So in this case, it's a 2-color stabilized. Again, the data type is number. And what we've done down here at the bottom is defined the thresholds that we perceive to be the delineation from the low worst to a low target to what is we perceive as the best. So the idea is that in a perfect world, we want 28 employees. If we have too many, that's tough. If we don't have enough, that's equally tough. So this is the setup of one of our stabilized, in this case, the 2-color stabilized scoring type. Okay, and then before we leave this one behind, I'll just click done here. And I did just want to reflect again the use under the human resources scorecard of different weights. So if I can direct your attention again to the lower middle, you see the 7 different measures that are being rolled up. But please just take note that for the employee satisfaction survey, they've determined that that's got 25% weight or importance. Okay, and the number of CVs received, on the other hand, is 8.33. Staff attrition rate, again, weighted at 25%. And way down at the bottom, this headcount measure that we've been discussing has been weighted at 16.67. So the math that is being applied here to this roll-up of human resources is taking all of the weighting in conjunction with the normalized scores and giving us an accurate overall human resources department score of 5.53. All right. I'll jump back again to the dashboard. Now, we're almost done here, folks, but I do want to just round out this webinar with one more concept for you here around the idea of comparing your apples to your oranges to your bananas to your cherries in one just big old fruit basket. I've shown you how this one consolidated dashboard is reflecting measures that come from all kinds of different departments within the Mobile World organization. And one thing that I did as well here for this webinar, back in the scorecards area under Mobile World, is I created a theme here that really kind of replicates or reflects what I just showed you on the dashboard, where this theme is called Apples and Oranges Measures Overview. And you'll see the same measures of product I've linked to product revenue, leads, customer churn percentage, and headcount. The same thing that you saw out on the dashboard with the speedometers is now reflected here. I'm linking to all of them in their various different departments, and I'm rolling those all up on an equally weighted basis up to this theme called Apples and Oranges Measures Overview. And what I would like to do is get this score of 5.31 for the month of March 2021 onto that dashboard, so that I don't have to when I'm on the dashboard. So if I'm back in this dashboard with the 4 key measures, when I'm here, I don't have to do the math myself to add 5.27 and 6.42 and 4.53 and 5 and then divide by 4. I just want that presented right here on the dashboard to me. So a quick amendment to the dashboard can be made because that's available, that score is available to me in the scorecard. So what I'm going to do is just edit this dashboard. I'm going to jump up here into full screen mode. I'm just going to adjust my browser resolution to make this a little easier to see and to work with, and then hope that my mouse doesn't die, which it did just a second ago. And what I'm going to do is just make a quick, real quick and easy, just physical adjustment to the layout of this dashboard by just moving my speedometers over a little bit. So I've got a little room over here on the left to add something new. And the way I'm going to choose to represent the overall performance across these 4 measures that I've created back in the scorecard is with a linear gauge. And I'm going to simply point to that Apples and Oranges Measure Overview theme and say, add it. That's what I want. And then I'll just click away, and I'm going to position this gauge and resize it very quickly and easily to be the right size that I desire on this dashboard. And so lickety-split there, I now have added this new view, if you will, of our performance across all 4 of these very disparate measures. Again, one's an apple, one's an orange, one's a banana, and the other's a cherry. But they are all being they're being presented, visually presented all on one page, and then they're being nicely rolled up and summarized in this score of 5.31 over here on the left. So I'll click save, and then I'll get out of full screen mode. And then let's just make sure that this really works and that the score changes as I go forward and backward in time. So I'm just using up here in the upper right, I'll actually get out of edit mode. In the upper right, I'm just navigating back in time and looking for obviously my speedometer indicators of performance to change, as well as that overall Apples and Oranges Measure Overview in my vertical gauge to also reflect the change in time and performance that I'm seeing. Okay. So that wraps up the demo that I wanted to share with you, and we're darn close here to the end of this webinar. Bear with me just a quick second while I pop back into full screen mode here. And so we're done with the demonstration. I just want to wrap up here by just summarizing what I feel like I shared with you today. And so it all again went back to really the key foundation of what happens in scoring and coloring in Spider Impact. So again, just a quick review of what we've covered is that Spider Impact assigns a normalized score between 0 to 10 to all actual performance values that you provide, the KPIs and measures that you are tracking. It also applies an associated color to the normalized score, again, according to whatever scoring type and whatever thresholds you've defined. And lastly, it rolls up the normalized scores to higher levels using, as we've discussed repeatedly, a weighted average. So that's, again, just a quick summary of what I feel like we covered today. At this point, I just want to thank you very much for taking the time to join me on this webinar or webcast, where, again, we talked about comparing apples and oranges to manage strategy in Spider Impact. Again, thank you for attending. Please join us again next month in May for our next monthly webinar. Have a great day, everyone.